So, hi.
Hello.
Okay, so with that, we are going to actually go straight into today's conversation and today's message. And today actually is the first Sunday of the Advent season leading up to Christmas, which I seriously can't believe.
Yeah, this year's really flown by. So it's kind of snuck up on me. I don't know if it snuck up on you guys with all the shipping stuff. Hopefully you're kind of on it with the Christmas buying thing. Yes. I would say we are not. Maybe just, we're just off of it. We're just a shade off of being on it.
I'm not one of those, let's finish my Christmas shopping in November kind of people. It just doesn't happen for me. Nope. But so today is the first Sunday of Advent, and it's basically this season of waiting, of kind of this practicing of waiting for the coming of Christ. And, for us in our tradition, Christmas is where we celebrate the birth of Jesus. And so it's sort of this way that we can kind of embody that expectant waiting and kind of spend time intentionally thinking about just that expectant waiting for Christ to come. And, we know that that God is with us now, but we also know that there are ways in which things aren't all the way right. And we can see that in our world. And so I think it's also a time of us kind of expectantly waiting for God to enter into those situations where we still feel that we have yet to see redemption or to see the things that we're longing for and that we're hoping for. And each of the 4 Sundays of Advent, there's a different theme. There's hope, peace, joy, and love. And today we are starting with the word hope. And so what I'm really excited about is we actually are using this really beautiful resource this year for our Advent series called A Sanctified Art. And if you are interested in kind of looking at it, you can go to their website, but it's really beautiful. It's a beautiful, inclusive kind of resource, just with some poetry and some artwork and sermon ideas and a devotional that actually we're going to be printing off and passing out to everyone next week at our in-person. And the theme for the Advent series is called Close to Home. And so here's kind of a few of the things that on their website, it kind of talks about this idea of close to home, where it says, when something hits close to home, it affects us deeply. Close to home acknowledges the already but not yet tension of our faith. Emmanuel is with us, and yet God's promised day, our everlasting home, is not fully realized. So it names our deep longing for God to come close to us. So it's kind of this idea of we know that God is with us, but yet everything isn't right in the world. And so there's ways in which God still needs to show up, So that's kind of the idea of this. And so the conversation we're going to have this morning is kind of along the lines of this theme of close to home, and in keeping with the theme of the first week of Advent, which is hope. We're going to talk a little bit about our thoughts and experiences around what home means to us, and specifically around this idea of being homesick and how we can kind of have this longing for something that maybe we don't have yet. And so we're just going to have a conversation about this idea of homesickness and how that can relate to this idea of hope around Advent. And so first of all, Dan, maybe you can share first, what's your first memory of being homesick? Or maybe even just any memory of a time when you were away from home and you were just longing for that feeling of coming home.
Yeah, I think probably my first memory would be when I was a kid going to church camp. That was kind of our kind of version of summer camp, and I think that was the first time I remember being homesick. I, even as a kid, was very outgoing, loved to meet new people, and shocker. And so I loved the idea of camp, but then getting there was that, that all kids experience, that, mom and dad are at home and it's all new and it's all, so I think that was the thing the time that I first remember homesickness, but I think it hits different when you go to college, when you go to school. You're older, so it's not quite as acute. But there's this wake-up call of like, oh, this is the new normal. It's not like, hey, this is going to be alleviated. This longing will be alleviated in a few days. It's like, oh, this is, you got to learn to live managing kind of that tension of being excited for what is, but also mourning what you don't have, what you're missing, you know? So I think that's kind of my first recollections. What about you?
Yeah, I always got homesick as a kid when I went places. I'm an introvert, shocker to everyone. But also I'm a homebody. I love being at home. And so I think as a kid, like even when I would go spend the night with a friend, it was like I would reach my limit. Our oldest daughter calls it her social battery, and she'll be like, Mom, my social battery is totally depleted. And I'm like, I totally get it, because like that's how I would feel. But there was something about being at home where I was comfortable, where my things were, that was familiar, where I didn't feel awkward getting something out of the refrigerator, you know, like where it just had that comfort and that safety of being
you didn't feel like you had to be on, you know what I mean? That you had to, yep.
Yeah, so I think anytime I would go to a friend's house, I mean, I loved going and hanging out with my friends, but I would always just be so ready to come home when I did come home. And even I didn't travel a lot as a kid, but there were times where maybe I went to a camp or like when I went off to school, that was a time where it was different, you know, and I had to get used to living with other people who weren't my family. And I had to you just miss those comforts and the safety and the familiarity of being at home.
Yeah. Jenny mentioned being an exchange student in Italy over Christmas and how hard that was, you know, especially not knowing the language, and that adds even another layer of complexity and challenge to it as well.
Yeah, and everybody feel free to share in the chat too, like any experiences you can remember of just like being homesick, of just wanting to be home where things were comfortable and familiar and safe, and feel free to share that.
Did you ever, when you're spending the night at a friend's house, call your mom and have her come pick you up? Your mom's in the chat, so we'll know if you're lying. So go ahead. Nancy, call her out if she lies.
I can't remember if I did. Now, I know that I remember one time, there were some friends of ours that lived down the street. And so I think I was in 6th grade at the time. And they had family in Ohio, but there's a little island that's in Lake Erie. Is that the lake that's above by Ohio? And it's called Putin Bay. That's the name of the island. Putin Bay.
Putin Bay.
P-U-T-N-Bay.
Putin
Bay. And her grandparents lived there, and so she invited me to come with. Well, she had a little brother who was, I think my brother was, probably 1st grade. And I remember he came with us, and we got there and he just was a sobbing mess because he missed my mom so bad and was like, I made a mistake. You know,
that's awesome.
So yeah, totally that. So I don't know, Mom, maybe you can share in there if I ever called you and had you come pick me up.
Yep.
I know that I loved being at home.
Yeah.
Olga said, for me, I feel homesick, kind of how Dan was saying, when things are out of the norm. Holidays I spent working at my job instead of with family were not fun, but, adulting. I'm thankful this year I will be with family throughout the holidays.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that, I love that idea of like when things are out of the norm, like when things don't feel, there's just something when things don't feel as they should be. And I think that's a good way to describe like homesickness, is where you have this longing for something that is not your current reality, but that is there, or that you've experienced before. And that's kind of this next question is, when you feel homesick, what exactly is it that you're longing for? What do you think those feelings are that when you feel homesick, why do we feel that way?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's an element of like things not being as we expect them. I love what Olga said, having a big family so normal was the wildness that comes from
Yeah.
a big family, you know,
Yeah.
kids crying, people running around. And I remember that from my grandma's house, this small house, and we'd all pack in and all the cousins, and it was just shoulder to shoulder, but that felt normal. So I think there's an element of expectation, and when that's not met, you know, that feels off. But I also think there's an element of trying to think the right way to frame it, of like, at home, you know you belong. Like, there's no doubt of that. You know, that's not even in question. That's not even something. But when you're away from home, there's this element of, do I belong? Do I fit in? What are the norms here that for this time, that I need to at least acknowledge and understand? But yet, still, ultimately, what I want is to be home where I don't have to worry about X, Y, and Z. So I think there's an element of that.
And it's interesting because when you said that, when you're at home, you know you belong, it made me think of, gosh, how extra hard, like, there are probably people who have experienced a lack of belonging within their own family. And I think, like, I'm thinking of like LGBTQ folks, you know, who oftentimes lose belonging, or maybe you have big disagreements with family members, and so you feel a lack of belonging in your home. And I think the reason why that cuts so deep is because home is supposed to be the place where we experience belonging and unconditional love and acceptance. And so when that is lacking, I can imagine even more so, like, not only are you, like, you're longing for that belonging, but you're also grieving the lack of it, you know? So I can that just came through my mind when you were saying that about, like, you know, because I know for me, it's like, yeah, the home to me is like where I belong, where I'm loved, where I'm safe. But for some people, that isn't the case. And so, yeah. Adam said, I felt somewhat homesick the first few years in Texas. For me now, I feel the element of community. I found my people and my contribution to the festivities and to relationships. Still not back around family, but this feels like home now. And that's interesting too, how like what feels like home to you can shift and change over time too, you know? Like, even though, like, I know for me on Thanksgiving, I mean, it was great. Like, it was just our little family here at home. And so I loved it, but there was an element of, I missed my mom. I missed my family. I wanted, there was that longing of, like, yes, I'm home here with my family, but also there were elements of things that felt like they were missing. Yeah. And so, yeah. So now to kind of shift gears a little bit from like our personal experience with homesickness, but more kind of around this idea of relating homesickness, the kind of homesickness we feel when we're away from home, to maybe from a more like spiritual perspective, or like how these deep longings that we have within ourselves, longing for things to be like that feeling we get when you are at home and you are where you feel like you belong and where you feel safe and where you feel loved, all those feelings. I think sometimes as we look at the world at large, I think that feels lacking in a lot of ways when we look out at just everything in our world and the immense amount of injustice and suffering and even just loneliness, and people walking through grief, and people, you know, struggling with different things with their family or with finances or with their health, or, you know, things just feel like everything doesn't feel right. And so what are some, like, as we look kind of collectively as humans, what do you think are some ways that we experience homesickness collectively?
You know, I think what first comes to my mind is Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. You know, that sort of like, he's seen this vision, he knows what it is he wants his children and grandchildren to grow up within, but also acknowledges we're not there yet. Yeah. You know, that clearly we still have a long ways to go. Yeah. But so there is a little bit of that element of like longing, hoping for the way that would feel home. You know, your mom's talked about how you guys had a welcoming and kind of comfy home. You know, kind of that imagining of like, my kids growing up in a space that's not a fear they have to carry. That's not it feels welcoming. It feels comfy. It feels, that, but yet acknowledging we are far from there. I mean, he was murdered for the things that he was saying by the, so I think that's kind of the first thing that kind of comes to my mind when I think about that. And that's, I would, I think there's some that could say that that's not very spiritual. I would say that is the definition of what is spiritual, so I think that's kind of one thing that comes to my mind. What about you?
Yeah. I was just thinking about like just the state of our world, yes, but also I think just our country and community, and how there's just such a sense right now of this constant animosity and division and injustice, and I think there's just something about that it's like I'm homesick for peace and unity, but also knowing that like that comes at a high cost. Like you can't have peace and unity without addressing the injustices that are taking place within the systems and within, all over. And so I think for me, I think that's something that as I look out right now and I see just my heart I long for the day when people, like when everybody's life actually matters, like when I long for, we just, sat through and watched the trial of Ahmaud Arbery's killers, and like I long for the day when we don't when justice is that he would still be alive. Like I long for the day when LGBTQ folks don't have to constantly like assert themselves for their own belonging, but where that's just a given. I long for the day when we are able to kind of come together despite differences. And, I long for all of those. And so I think homesick, like a sanctified art, this whole idea of like close to home and homesickness, I feel like is such an appropriate description of what I feel like in my heart when I look at our world and what I'm longing for, in our world. Jenny and Mark said, thinking about how sad it is that people of color are not safe from violence, going for a simple run, thinking of Ahmaud Arbery and his family and all my friends of color. Yeah, for sure. It's like that. It's like there is just clearly, when we look out, we see there is just all is not well. Things are not right. There is still so much redemption that needs to come. And so, yeah, I think that's a way that we, collectively kind of hold that homesickness within our own hearts. And yet, I think because today's theme is hope, we also want to kind of talk about that, there's these ways in which we look out and we see there's just that we're so far from. It's like God is with us. Emmanuel is here. Christ has come. Like we have that hope. And also we are so aware of the ways in which, there's times where I'm just like, God, will you please just freaking show up? Yeah. Where it's like, where it feels like where there's just that longing for justice and for peace and for all of that. And so I guess that for the next question, when we are talking about these deep longings, in what ways do your deepest longings intersect with deep hope? How do you, amidst those longings for the ways in which things are not right, how do you hold on to hope in those times? And what gives you hope?
So I hope this makes sense. I'm kind of thinking as I talk, but I think what gives me hope, like when you were saying all that, I was reminded of, like, I can imagine how the disciples felt, when Jesus talked about the kingdom of God is upon you. The first time they heard that idea, that the kingdom of God, and for them as Jewish people, that means perfect harmony with God, with neighbor, with earth, with that was there was a collective understanding when Jesus would talk about the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God. And it for them, it wasn't about going to some special place after they died. They had very little concept of that, if any. It was about living in perfect union and harmony with God, with man, and with the earth. And for Jesus to say that, I'm sure there was an element of like, Jesus, I think you might have missed the boat on this one, because there isn't perfect harmony, you know.
It'd be like someone saying that now, you know, and you're like, well, do you not see the madness that is ensuing around all of us right now?
But the message of Jesus was, now work to bring it here, you know, work to actualize it, to manifest it, to bring it into the here and now. And that's what it's about. You know, when he taught them to pray, your kingdom would come on earth as it is in heaven. You know, it's this bringing the kingdom of God here. So I think what gives me hope is the actions of people that have gone before us, that have done that work, and the ways in which we can partner to bring that here. You know, it's one thing to, I think it's important to acknowledge and to mourn the ways in which we're not there, but then also to continue to work for it. And I think what gives me hope is, if you look at the arc of history, Dr. King was right. It does bend towards justice. It bends slowly.
It does. Sometimes too slowly for my liking.
Yeah, but in a lot of ways, you know, the world is changing in ways that are like the kingdom of heaven. You know, there is less war, there is less famine, there is less, you know, global poverty. All of these things. Again, we're far from there, but I'm hopeful by watching the work of people that have gone before us. And I think, and this is kind of the last thing I'll say kind of on this, but I think where Christians have missed it, where I have missed it, is with our kind of eschatology, with our like end times thinking. I think so many of us, I came up in a time in the church that the end times was like, bad things were going to happen, and then Jesus was going to suck all of us Christians out of here and just let the thing burn. And then there'd be this, then we'd be in heaven, you know? So there was very little care for earth. There was very little, you know, neighbors. It was like, hey, let's try to get them on the spaceship getting out of here. But if not, like, whatever, you know, there was, well, I mean, we didn't call it that, but
because it's accurate. That's what it felt like. It's like, we're going to get sucked up on this spaceship.
So like, if you can get a ticket, great. If not, like, you know, we're not really doing work here to change this, because it's all going to burn. And that's never been an eschatology espoused by the Bible, you know. How it will come is the kingdom of God will invade earth, you know, and we're to participate in that work in the here and now. So I think what gives me hope in acknowledging that we are far from there is that we get to be a part of bringing it there. You know, we get to do the work to help bring the kingdom of heaven here. And no, not for everyone, but for one person, but for two people, but for, you know, a community of people. So I think that's what gives me hope, is that ability to create home in a homeless world for some people. I think.
I love that. Create home in a homeless world. I love that. I love that. And that's not to say, like, you know, I'm not like making fun of like people who hold out hope for heaven or for the afterlife, you know, like, I mean, none of us know. Like, if any of us say, well, we know what happens when we die, we don't. None of us know for sure. And I think it's important to be hopeful. I hope. I mean, with the amount of suffering in this world, I hope. Well, I hope there is something
absolutely
on the other side. And I know you're not.
I wasn't saying one cancels the other. No. I'm not saying that,
But when the focal point is on that, it's like, you're right, it alleviates the... pressure isn't the right word, but alleviates the urgency. It
just creates apathy. It's like, well, who cares about...
You don't care about the planet. You don't care about so much about injustice here, because it's like, well, eventually, you know, this is all going to burn, and, you know, we'll be in heaven, so it won't matter. And I think that, that's what it did for me anyway. It created apathy within me. And so I so resonate with everything that you're saying of, like, you know, there's so much work to be done. And like, you know, and I think I'm with you when it comes to, you know, my deepest longing intersecting with deep hope. I think that too. I look at the people the people who came before us, and also the people now who are putting their bodies on the line and who are doing this incredible work of bringing healing and bringing restoration and bringing home to a homeless world. Like, I love that. That's like, I think that just perfectly encapsulates it, where it's like, how can we be agents of hope where we help people feel like they're at home, where they feel like they belong, they feel like they are loved, they know that their felt needs are noticed and they matter, and that we're going to, make sure to work towards a world where there is equity and there is justice and there is, resources for everyone. People don't have to go without, and so, I think that for me too is just watching all the people around me doing this incredible work, that I'm like, if, in particular, when I look at these Black racial justice advocates, and I look at them and I'm like, okay, after all they've been through, after all they've experienced, if they are still hoping for a better world, like, I can too, And so, I just think that what a great, I'm like, we put that on the website somewhere, like, bringing home to a homeless world. That's just really resonating so deeply with me right now.
Dan Matlock, Wayne Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky. Dan,
that's an Office reference for when.
Yeah. But no, what you're saying is, I had something to say.
Oh, no.
I swear I did.
Sorry.
No. I think going back to homesickness, I think that's what would alleviate homesickness, is the people that would step in and help make up for those things.
Yeah,
The way, I think about when we first got married, the way Kim and Dino really did that for us. We were newly married, didn't have family around, but yet there was another family, Kim and Dino, who created that for us, who did things for us, who felt like,
invited us over for dinner, made us feel like we were
helped us with groceries, and did those things that that family does in that time. And it wasn't that our parents didn't care. They just didn't know. They just weren't there.
They were so far away that it was like we could call them and we could visit them, but they weren't there in our town with us.
And I think about the ways when we've moved and had young kids and not been around family, it was the friends and the people around us that would alleviate those needs, that kind of homelessness in a sense, kind of that longing, not having that, being homesick, providing those things. And I think that that we can do that kind of in a spiritual sense as well, on a broader scale.
Yeah. And I guess a good challenge for all of us too, moving forward after today too, is how can we bring home for someone who might be feeling that sense of homelessness or homesickness? How can we do that for people around us? How can we do it for our neighbor? How can we do it for that coworker or that family member or that friend who's going through a hard time? How can we do that, for one another? And then this is our last question. And then Dan, I know you're going to have to go in a minute. What time are you leaving?
10-ish.
Okay, so we got about 5 minutes before Dan has to jet because he's got to go to the airport to catch a flight.
Adam's picking me up, so he's probably going to be here in a minute.
He's always early.
There's people that are always late. I like Adam. He's always early. So
yeah. So just last question, and I would love for you to answer this in the chat too, for everyone watching and listening. So where do you, right now specifically, where do you see God entering a homesick world? What are some, maybe one way right now that you've experienced or seen God show up in a homesick world?
That's a good question. What about you?
One way for me, recently, there's a pastor in Austin who has just been so great and has just kind of extended a lot of invitations to me to find community with other pastors. It's no secret to anyone that we've just experienced some, not a lot of arms extended from pastors locally here in our community. And so that's one way, is just through him continually inviting me in and making sure that I am finding community and connection with other pastors. But then in particular, he invited me to, there is an organization called the Multi-Faith Neighboring Network. And basically it's where they bring rabbis and imams and pastors. So imams are like Muslim leaders in the Muslim, tradition. Bring them together just to build a relationship and to work together to create a better world. And I remember Amanda and I went to this meeting, and we sat around this table with multiple imams and rabbis and some pastors. And I just looked around the table and I was like, it felt like hope to me. It felt like an embodiment of hope, of all of us saying we practice our faith differently. We believe very different things. We weren't around that table to try to convert one another or to try to tell each other who's right and who's wrong, but it was about, we all want to create a better world, a better, more loving, more just, peaceable world. And that felt like hope and home to me around that table. It was really beautiful.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. See, Jenny said, meeting Sheree and seeing how God is answering my prayer to understand my daughter better through her friendship. How cool is that?
That's awesome.
Gosh, yeah. I love that. That is like God entering, God with us, God entering into our world. That's really beautiful.
Your mom said taking care of the refugees.
Yeah. Yep. For sure.
Yeah.
Kat said, a place where everyone gets to experience happiness and love. Yep. And it's so simple, like it doesn't have to be complicated, but just where we open up space for people to feel at home, and to continue and to remember that, like, God is working. The Spirit is working, that even when everything feels like it's on fire, when it is on fire, that God does enter into our world and meet us in those places. And sometimes in very simple ways and sometimes in more profound ways. But yeah, that's what I think during this season of Advent, that's what I'm going to be really intentional about, is looking for places where I see God entering into our homesick world, and remembering that and being very sharpening my awareness and being aware of ways in which God is doing that.
Yeah.
See, Tammy said, seeing God provide for those families in need. Been seeing a lot in foster families lately and for those children. Yeah, that's so cool. Yep, taking care of foster kids. Absolutely. Yeah. That's God entering into our world. It's so true.
I think for me, as I think about that, through what Icon has done, through, so many churches, like when you've experienced kind of the lack of belonging that can happen in church, if I was reading a Twitter thread about something that this author had written, this book that is getting a lot of attention now, and now she's getting a lot of negative feedback from kind of like Christian gatekeepers, and it very much feels like, I want to ignore all the rest of your work. What do you think about this issue or this topic or this? And if you say it wrong, if you don't give the answer they like, then they throw everything out. And when I see things like that, it's people in the church that are running around those people, creating that belonging. That's where I see God at work. So when you talk about, the ways in which Zach is kind of opening doors for Icon and for you and for Amanda, and, the ways in which Icon has done that, the way that you and the team are kind of leading things. I think that when people, especially when they're, when they kind of give of themselves, when it can cost them something, you know what I mean? I think that's when I really see God at work, because there's sacrifice required, and I see that in God.
Yep. I love, and I don't know how many of you I've talked about Rachel Held Evans a million times before, but there's a children's book that was released, her and then Matthew Paul Turner, but it's called What is God Like? And there's I wish I would have grabbed it, but I just now thought of it. But it's like, basically it's the whole book is talking about what is God like. And it's like, if you're ever wondering what God is like, it's like whatever makes you feel safe, whatever makes you feel loved, whatever makes you feel brave, that's what God is like. And so I just think when I see people feeling loved, when people help other people feel brave or feel like they can make it, you know, to me, like, yeah, that's God entering into our world in those ways. Yeah. So, and you probably have to go. Yeah,
I gotta bounce.
Okay.
All right, see you guys.
Bye.
Good seeing everybody. Well, talking because I didn't see you. One way. So like when I look at you, I'm looking at a lens.
Like you can't, like there's no people on the screen.
Some of you have faces in the chat, but that was awkward.
Okay, see you later. Bye. All right. Well,
bye.
Okay. Never a dull moment with him, I'm telling you. Oh, okay. Well, here's how we're going to wrap things up today. So, we're just going to do kind of a little candle lighting liturgy here at the end. And I don't have an Advent candle. There's like Advent candles, or they have 4 candles and they're usually on a wreath and you light one each week. I don't have one of those, so I just got my candle. This is like one of my favorite scents from Target, blue lavender. I call it my sleepy time candle, but anyways. So if you have a candle, you can feel free to grab it. And first, I'm just going to read to you sort of this poem that it's written by Reverend Sarah Speed. She's one of the contributors for A Sanctified Art. I want to give her credit. But I'm just going to read this. It's called A Call to Worship, and then we're going to go into the candle lighting liturgy. And so I'm just going to kind of speak these words over you, and you can just kind of sit back and listen. You can also, feel free to any other thoughts that you have or encouragements you have for anyone, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. But here's the call to worship. It says, "Can one be homesick for something you've never known? We are homesick for a just world, for peace like rivers, for the end of suffering. Yes, we are homesick for joy that is contagious, for nations that feel like neighbors, and for hospitals that run empty. We are homesick for the world God promises. We are homesick, but we are on our way. God is here. God is still creating. Let us worship Holy God." And then for the candle lighting liturgy, I'm just going to go ahead and light my candle. And you can go ahead and light yours too, if you have one. Okay. I know you can't really see it. Ooh, that looks really interesting with the green screen, but okay. And let me read this over you. We hope for a world where all are fed. We hope for a world with more bridges than walls. We hope for a world with wide open doors. We hope for a world with contagious laughter. We hope for a world where trees go tall and creeks run clean. We hope for a world where all people feel at home in their bodies, in the church, and in their physical homes. We hope for that world. We long for that world. We are homesick for that world. So today we light the candle of hope, because hope keeps our hearts alive as we wait. May this light be a reminder that the wait is always worth it. We are close to home. May we carry hope with us. Amen. So thank you all for joining us today. And I guess just as I'm kind of looking at my candle and just letting it be symbolic of kind of igniting that hope within us as we celebrate Advent, as we look forward to the Christmas season and all that comes with it, just may we all do things during this season to ignite hope within our hearts. Maybe you feel like you've lost hope in some ways. Maybe hope seems hard to find. Maybe you are personally walking through something really difficult that makes it hard for you to hope because your circumstances that are right in front of you feel so heavy and so hard. And so today I'm thinking of you, and I'm praying for you, and I'm standing in solidarity with you, that may we do whatever we can to hold out hope that God has come and that God will continue to come and to be near us. And may we all, as we go forward in this season, be intentional about looking for ways that God is entering our homesick world. And also, like Dan said earlier, that we would find one way this week that we can help create home for people who are experiencing that kind of internal homelessness, where they maybe feel like they don't belong, or they feel hopeless, or they feel homesick for the kind of life that they are longing for. May we step in and provide that sense of home and safety and belonging for someone else this week. So that is all that I have for today. Thank you all so much for being here. Just a reminder that we have our in-person service next week, and be on the lookout on social media. We are still trying to lock down our location. So be checking your email this week when we send out our email, and also be watching on social media. You can always send an email to if you have any questions, but we will keep you updated on that. And so let's all hold on to hope this week. And until next Sunday, I hope you all have a fantastic week, and we will see you all next week.